Hello students, this is lessons 3 and 4, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So biodiversity is our main focus for this lesson. And if you haven't heard biodiversity yet this year, this is the number and variety of different species in an area. You want an ecosystem to be diverse. You want an ecosystem to have a high number of species. You want a high biodiversity. So a place like Antarctica where there's only penguins, that's low biodiversity. Or the North Pole where there's really only polar bears, that's low biodiversity. Somewhere like the rainforest where you have millions of species of insects and birds and snakes and panthers, that's a high biodiversity. You want an area to be a high biodiversity that allows for lots of food webs and food chains and a lot of different organisms to survive and reproduce. And you want a high biodiversity that allows for the health of an ecosystem. We live in an area that's a high biodiversity. We have chipmunks, we have squirrels, we have deer and turkeys and lots of species of birds and insects. High biodiversity means a healthy ecosystem. So this is important. Healthy ecosystems have a lot of biodiversity or a lot of different species. This allows for many types of interaction. So you have lots of predator-prey interactions, lots of competition. Competition keeps organisms on their toes, keeps organisms evolving and adapting. This allows for levels of mutualism, levels of parasitism. This allows for organisms to keep adapting and getting better over time. This allows for larger food webs, more diverse ecosystems. Larger food webs means more organisms eat a variety of different things. So if more organisms are eating more things, then if one thing or one of their food sources dies out or gets a disease or gets overeaten, there's another food source still, so you don't starve. So every organism still has their place in the environment and still needs to be protected. So this doesn't mean that, oh, we have enough species, we don't have to protect everyone. This means everybody still needs to be protected to keep that high biodiversity. So types of diversity, we have genetic diversity, which means there's diversity within the genes of a species. So that means all of us that are human, we have genetic diversity. We are diverse within ourselves. We have species diversity. So within an ecosystem, there are diverse species. You have alligators, you have butterflies, you have humans, you have birds, you have bees, you have whatever organisms live within your ecosystem. And then within the planet, we have ecosystem diversity. You have coral reefs, you have wetlands, you have the tundra, the taiga, you have deciduous forests and rainforests. So we have large-scale diversity on our planet. And then within individual ecosystems, you have different types of plants, different types of animals, different types of fungi. Then within individual species, you have genetic diversity that makes individual organisms different from one another. So you have grizzly bears, polar bears, panda bears, you have brown bears, black bears, and then even individually within them, their genes are different. Okay, so endangered species. Endangered species are species of an organism whose numbers are so low that they are threatened or close to extinction. We need to protect endangered species because when there aren't many left, this leads to low genetic diversity. Low genetic diversity means they don't have the genes capable of reproducing a wide variety. So it's almost as if the ones that are left over are reproducing like as if their parents were cousins. And even lower genetic diversity means almost as if their parents were brother and sister. That's bad. If they're low genetic diversity also means then that the genes that are left over, their gene pool gets so low that they're passing on poor genes. They're passing on gene pool genes that means that they are likely to pass on diseases. They're likely to pass on unfavorable traits. So we don't want this. The good thing is the government protects endangered species. It's illegal to hunt them. It is difficult to build houses and homes and factories and things where their habitats are. But the sad part is when you can no longer protect them, they do go extinct. And when extinction means when a species no longer exists. So I tried to find images that had the most endangered species all in a row. These are all examples of endangered species, and there are so many more. So you are free, of course, to pause on this slide and look at these ones. You are free to look up your own endangered species, but there are tons and tons of endangered species. There are threatened species. There are those that are highly threatened and close to extinction. There are some that are just slightly threatened and close to being off the list, but most of these are threatened due to climate change, due to human interactions. So a lot of this is our fault, and this is why we need to do our part to help them, why we have the list, why we work to protect them and have laws to protect them. So in our own specific country here, these are the places where we have endangered species. Most of these are in areas, so you could see Florida, the Southwest, Arizona, and California have the most endangered species. And most of this is because those are areas that are equally as threatened. So Florida is threatened due to climate change. Florida's wetlands are threatened due to building, due to human interaction, due to, I said, climate change, but also to flooding with sea level rise. Over in California, you have the wildfires. In Arizona, you have drought. So these areas that are threatening endangered species are also facing threats for humans too. So endangered species and humans are in danger of the same interactions, are in danger of the same danger. All right, factors that affect biodiversity and species. So changing climate, we know this. Organisms cannot always adapt quickly enough to changes of rainfall or temperature. So if you can't adapt to the changing climate, you will have trouble adapting and you will have trouble surviving. Natural disasters can leave species without food, water, or shelter. That goes the same with humans. Disease, sick organisms die, altering the food web for others. Human impacts, destruction of habitats for highways, homes, and buildings, destroys ecosystems and greatly affects biodiversity. Also poaching and overfishing and hunting. And pollution, animals also breathe the air and drink the water. Pollution affects them too. So a lot of these, the first several affect humans as well, but human impacts, the things that we do, affect animals too. So climate change is a primary driver of biodiversity loss. Climate change depends on biodiversity as part of the solution. So clearly the two are linked and cannot be separated. Climate change is a huge factor when it comes to the diversity and biodiversity of organisms. The two are linked. Climate change is caused by humans, and therefore climate change is also something that humans can control, and humans are the primary driver of biodiversity loss. So invasive species, these are species that arrived here that don't belong. These are organisms that arrive to an ecosystem, can be accidental, can be on purpose, but they're here and this is not their natural habitat. Sometimes they get here on purpose, as in somebody brings them to this ecosystem on purpose. Sometimes they get here by accident, like they get with worldwide global trade and travel. Sometimes organisms get stuck here in a shipping container or on an airplane. Usually that's usually an insect or a plant, the seeds of a plant, or the seeds or a nest of insects or something get stuck here. Things like stink bugs and lanternflies. Once they get here, they're like, wow, there's no predators here. Nothing here eats me. This is great. And so they reproduce and they lay more eggs and they reproduce and they lay more eggs. Because nothing here eats them, they just keep laying more eggs and having more offspring and laying eggs and having more offspring. They disrupt our food chains and webs here because they are now taking resources and food from the organisms that live here in our area. So they overpopulate. This is why we had the lanternfly explosion. This is why we have so many stink bugs. If nothing eats you, now you overpopulate and you start taking resources from other things. They can happen on purpose every so often. In fact, it happens all the time with alligators. Somebody brings an alligator from Florida or from the South and thinks, I can definitely keep this alligator in my house and no one's going to notice. And alligators grow to 8-10 feet long. You're not going to keep an alligator in West Mifflin or Duquesne. It's just not going to happen. They become vicious. They become overly large for your house. And so somebody just releases that alligator out into the wild thinking no one's going to notice. And then all of a sudden you hear on the news that alligators loose in Duquesne somewhere. That's an invasive species. They don't belong here, but those are usually on purpose. So what we do about them, and I have zebra mussels on here too. That one's up in Erie, but they can be in the waters too. You can bring an invasive species from one lake or from one ocean or from somewhere and bring it into another water body too. So to protect biodiversity, captive breeding programs, these help endangered species by safely allowing them somewhere to breed, to keeping their babies safe from predators. So it's almost like a little nursery. So you allow the pregnant animals to give birth somewhere, you keep their babies safe, and then once they are old enough to survive on their own, then you send them back out into the wild. National parks and wildlife refuges and marine fisheries. These are areas that are protected from hunting and fishing and human construction. So in these areas, the animals actually have more rights than the humans. That's a good thing. That means that those places are there specifically to protect those animals from all of the dangers that humans pose. There are specific laws out there that are there specifically to protect biodiversity. So there's a Convention on Biological Diversity that focuses on conservation. There's the Convention on International Trade and Endangered Species of Wild Fauna. This ensures the trade of plants and animals does not endanger them. I had to look that one up specifically. That one's for the protection of zoos. So zoos will trade animals back and forth to make sure that people have the option to see them, but to make sure that their transport and trade back and forth is still safe. And the Endangered Species Act protects endangered species and their habitats. And now we get to ecosystem services. And these are the benefits that we as humans receive just from existing in the environment. So the first ones are cultural services. And these are just nature's way of making you happy. So if you took a canoe ride, if you took a hike, if you explored Earth's natural history, we use cultural services to rest, to relax, to learn about the Earth. This is just the enjoyment you get from Earth's natural beauty. This is the cultural services are the parts of the Earth that just make you happy. If you took a picnic in a park, that would be a cultural service. So these are used for the health and wellness and to give meaning to your life. So provisional services, these are products obtained from Earth's natural resources. So provisional services are natural resources that occur in the environment that humans use. So water, whether it's fresh water or salt water, when we use animals and plants specifically and use them for food, when we use coal, oil, and natural gas for fuel, when we use solar, wind, or nuclear for energy, when we use trees for building, not for breathing, but for building, and we use plants and medicine, or plants and fungi specifically for medicine. So when we're using natural resources specifically for human use, so when we're using them, so cultural services would be for our happiness, provisional services would be for a specific resource use. Other ecosystem services, regulatory services are natural processes. So examples, decomposition, and these are just processes that occur naturally on the Earth that we benefit from. So we benefit from decomposition because we're not overrun with dead things on Earth. We benefit from plants when they remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We benefit from plants when they prevent erosion. We benefit from mussels and oysters when they decontaminate water. I don't know if you knew that, but mussels and oysters decontaminate water. And we benefit from insects when they pollinate our food. So we don't have to do anything here. We just benefit from these natural processes. These are called regulatory services. And the last ones are supporting services. We benefit here. These are not just humans that benefit here, but all organisms benefit from nature's supporting services. So the water cycle, the carbon oxygen cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the rock cycle. Okay, ecological restoration. So this is the practice of helping a destroyed or damaged ecosystem recover and return to its original state. So ways to restore ecosystems. You can replant trees when they are cut down, or you can plant native plants instead of exotic ones. So making sure your ecosystem and your yard looks the way it's supposed to and not so fancy. You want to make sure to have plants that are supposed to be there. So if you don't live in Hawaii, you shouldn't have Hawaiian plants in your yard because that's going to take more water and nutrients than your yard needs, and you don't want to have all of that exoticness there whenever you want your yard to be native and how it's supposed to be for Pennsylvania. So when ecosystems are severely damaged due to toxic chemicals, we use what's called bioremediation, the practice of using bacteria and microorganisms to break down pollutants. They can eat things like oil and plastic and other types of pollution. So bioremediation is when you're using living things to help tackle a biological problem. Reclamation, after an area has been abandoned of its human use, returning land to its original natural state in nature. So when an area has been abandoned, so let's say a factory has been abandoned and is no longer in use, or a mall that nobody uses and is in disrepair, reclamation is the idea that you tear that area down and you return the land back to nature. So you plant a forest, you plant a park there, you put something there that allows it to be back to nature as opposed to just letting it sit abandoned and unused. All right, conservation. Conservation is using less of a resource so it can last longer. We use these as the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reduce waste, reuse materials when you can, and recycle old products to make new ones. Sustainability, all of this has to deal with sustainability and the ability of an ecosystem to maintain its biodiversity and production indefinitely. That is all we have. Make sure you work on your assignment. Thank you for listening.